Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex ideas and, well, make them clear and engaging for you, the listener, who wants to understand things deeply without getting totally swamped.
That's the goal.
Today, we're tackling a really big topic, something that affects pretty much everyone who's experienced university life: belonging.
Absolutely. Thinking back on your own time or just what you know about college, feeling like you really belong, it's fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're digging into today, using a really insightful recent article from Educational Psychology Review, is how universities actually, shape those feelings. And uh, the surprisingly complex role acceptance plays in it all.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is to unpack how that personal feeling of belonging yours, or students you might know, isn't just about finding your friends. It's
Wow.
deeply connected to the social and political dynamics within the university itself. And the research we're looking at focuses particularly on students who've often been, shall we say, on the margins of these institutions.
Yeah, and to really get our heads around this, we're going to explore a couple of key ideas. First, there's this framework, uh, place belongingness and the politics of belonging.
Okay.
It helps us see how connecting to a place like a university has all these different layers, and crucially, how power structures influence who feels like they truly fit in.
Power structures. Interesting.
And we'll also look at cultural scripts in universities. These are those kind of unspoken rules and expectations that guide how we act and feel.
And you mentioned something really intriguing before, that some ways universities try to make students feel accepted might actually come with a hidden cost.
Exactly, a kind of trade-off, potentially asking students to, well, give up important parts of who they are.
Wow. Okay, let's dive in then. Belonging, it's not just nice to have, it's essential. And as this research shows, it's both personal and political.
It really is. And what's fascinating is this place belongingness and politics of belonging framework. So think of place belongingness. This comes from Anton Sich as having like 6 key dimensions. Yeah. First, autobiographical. That's your personal history, your memories tied to the place. Then relational is your friendships, your social connections.
Makes sense.
Cultural aspects, shared traditions, ways of doing things. Economic, feeling secure, able to meet your needs there. Legal, your rights, your status within that place. And finally, elective, just choosing to be there, identifying with it.
So it's way more than just liking your classes or dorm, it's your whole self connecting.
Precisely. But then you add the politics of belonging, drawing on Yuval Davis's work.
Right, the power part.
Exactly. This bit reminds us that these feelings of being at home aren't just floating freely. They're shaped by power dynamics. Who feels they belong? Who gets accepted? That's often determined by social boundaries, lines drawn to include some and exclude others.
Okay, so belonging is multifaceted, sure, but the politics means these different factors aren't equally available to everyone.
You got it. The politics of belonging really highlights how your social position, your race, class background, gender, all that, and whether that position holds power or privilege within the university, massively impacts how you experience those 6 aspects of place belongingness.
And that's where intersectionality comes in, right? How those different identities overlap.
Absolutely. Covarrubias applied this directly to higher ed, pointing out how systems of whiteness and other intersecting oppressions, like racism and classism, create this specific political climate on campus. And that climate really shapes how students feel those 6 factors of being at home.
So, because we all have these different combinations of identities, positioned differently in the university's power structure, our needs for belonging can be really different. It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. And this framework pushes us to think, okay, how can institutions actually meet these diverse needs better by really understanding these underlying power things?
So, what are some ways to address this?
Well, one really powerful practice highlighted in the source material is counter-storytelling. This draws on work by Solorzano and Yoso.
Counter storytelling. Tell me more about that. What does it look like?
Think of it as a way for groups who are often pushed to the margins to share their stories, their knowledge, their ways of resisting dominant narratives. It's about personal and collective storytelling.
Okay.
In doing that, directly addresses those autobiographical, relational, and cultural aspects of belonging we talked about. By centering voices and experiences that are usually ignored, it validates students' histories and perspectives.
That makes so much sense. If the main narrative doesn't reflect you, it must be incredibly isolating. Sharing your story, hearing others like you, that must build connection.
Huge connection. And when these stories are shared in supportive places, with others who've faced similar marginalization, Well, these places become what are called counter spaces.
Counter spaces, like safe havens.
Kind of, yeah. Supportive environments specifically for marginalized groups. Case and Hunter explored this. These counter spaces really nurture belonging by fostering shared understanding and strong social ties.
Are there examples?
Yeah, the article gives a great one. A year-long program at a mostly white university specifically for undergraduate women of color in STEM.
Oh, interesting.
By sharing their stories, their counter stories, with peers and professionals who really got their experiences, they felt more empowered, more seen. They could create new narratives about their place in STEM, where they're often underrepresented. Wilkins Yale documented this.
So these counter spaces sound vital, but the article notes they aren't usually part of the mainstream institution, right? They're counter for a reason.
That's a really crucial point. While universities might have, diversity offices or initiative, these dedicated counter spaces often operate a bit separately, outside the main structures. And this really highlights how the chances to feel truly accepted can vary a lot depending on where a student is within the university. Which brings us neatly to the role of cultural scripts.
Cultural scripts. Okay, what's the deal with those?
So think of them as the shared, often unspoken understandings about social experiences. Gutierrez and others explored this. These scripts basically tell us how to think, feel, and act in different situations, including university life. They define what's normal or appropriate.
And I'm guessing normal often lines up with the dominant groups on campus. Middle class, white, students whose parents went to college.
Exactly. The source material referencing Garcia emphasizes this. University cultural scripts often align with those experiences. And this can, maybe unintentionally, maybe not, make the values and ways of doing things of marginalized students seem, well, less legitimate.
Okay, here's where it gets tricky. If the university's unspoken rules don't match your background, what happens? Does it pressure you to change?
Precisely. This is where that idea of a trade-off comes in, something scholars like Anzaldúa and Hooks describe so powerfully.
A trade-off.
Yeah, to feel accepted in those mainstream university spaces, which often privilege the dominant culture, students might feel they have to hide or silence or even change important parts of themselves. Their perspectives, how they talk, their experiences. Even those place belongingness needs we discussed. Figure 1 in the article actually shows this visually.
Wow.
Ultimately, these scripts often work from this, like false idea that difference is a problem, a deficit that needs fixing for someone to be accepted.
So acceptance might mean sacrificing authenticity, giving up a piece of yourself to fit in. That sounds incredibly tough.
It really is. And to understand this better, it helps to think about multiple selves navigating multiple worlds. We all have different sides to us, right?
Sure.
These different parts of ourselves come out in the different social worlds we move through. Think Anzaldúa's work, or even Du Bois' concept of double consciousness.
And worlds here means different social settings. Family, community, university classes, friend groups.
Exactly. Lugones clarified this worlds can be small groups or larger societal structures with their own rules. For marginalized students, some of these worlds, especially the dominant university one, might not reflect who they feel they are. Instead, these worlds can impose limiting ideas, creating what Freiberg and Townsend call a psychology of invisibility. Basically, denying students the space to just be themselves.
That feeling of not being seen, not being understood, that must really chip away at your sense of belonging, even your self-worth.
Absolutely. Institutional cues, little signals that suggest you don't quite fit or aren't valued, can trigger social identity threat, which Murphy and colleagues talked about.
Threat?
Yeah, and this can drain your mental energy, leading to things like stereotype threat, which steal research that can actually hurt academic performance.
So students are constantly walking this tightrope. Stay true to yourself and maybe feel like an outsider, or try to fit in and risk losing parts of who you are?
That's the tension. This idea of world traveling really captures that constant negotiation many students face.
It's exhausting.
It can be. Lugones' concept of world traveling really illuminates this. She argued that for marginalized folks, moving between these worlds isn't really a choice. It's often necessary for survival or just getting by.
Right.
Like consciously shifting how you talk or act depending on who you're with. But the trade-off, as research points out, is often authenticity. You can't always just relax and be fully yourself everywhere.
Anzaldúa's idea of Nepantla seems to capture that in-between state so well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nepantla, that liminal uncertain space where different cultural understandings collide because you're moving between worlds. It's this psychological, even spiritual zone full of paradox and contradiction. Expectations clash. And Zaldua knew this from her own life.
That sounds like it could cause a lot of internal conflict, discomfort.
Definitely. Psychologists might call it cognitive dissonance, right? That unease when you hold conflicting beliefs or experiences. Anzalduas saw Nepantla presenting a similar choice. You can retreat from that discomfort, or you can move through it, embrace its potential for transformation.
So it's uncomfortable, but navigating that space can actually lead to growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anzaldúa used the term conocimiento for this becoming aware of and freeing yourself from limiting norms and systems. It's about resisting and rewriting those restrictive cultural scripts about who you are and who you can be.
Rewriting the script.
Yeah, the source mentions research where students in Nepantla pushed back against narrow ideas of what it meant to be a good student or a good member of their community, creating new stories that felt more true to them.
That sounds incredibly empowering, that active renarration.
It is. And it can lead to what Anzaldúa called a mestiza consciousness, a more fluid way of understanding yourself, one that can hold contradictions, hold ambiguity. Research shows how people draw on this plurality, blending values and tools from different worlds to navigate challenges, resist just assimilating, and embrace all these multiple parts of their identity.
It's fascinating how this internal shift can link to wider social change.
Totally. Anzaldúa saw this inner work as fuel for social action. And Lugones talked about traveling lovingly, really trying to understand others' experiences from their context as a way to build bridges.
Traveling lovingly.
And Lugones also introduced loving playfulness. It's an intentional way of relating that steps outside the usual rules, allowing for new connections without demanding everyone become the same. This kind of acceptance really values both the personal and the social aspects of belonging, letting people express different identities without that painful trade-off for authenticity.
But, as the article stresses, not all acceptance is created equal. Some institutional approaches can actually be harmful.
Yes, big time. The article really digs into these harmful scripts of acceptance. They often have this unspoken expectation. Assimilate, fit in, which forces that awful choice between being yourself and belonging.
They assume difference is a problem.
Exactly. They operate on that false premise.
Yeah.
And the first example is assimilation itself, right? The idea that you need to become like the dominant culture.
That seems pretty outdated, but does it still linger?
It does. Even some older theories about student success, though they've been critiqued, basically emphasized fitting into the campus culture, which often meant adopting majority norms and maybe pulling away from your home community. These ideas can still pop up in subtle ways.
Like through color evasion.
Yeah.
Talking about diversity, but downplaying race.
Precisely. It emphasizes sameness, ignores racial differences, basically making a huge part of many students' identities invisible. Now, multiculturalism, that does highlight differences, but the article points out that some superficial forms can still end up reinforcing a kind of sameness underneath.
How? If it's celebrating difference, how is it about sameness?
Well, think about surface-level stuff, like a food festival celebrating culture, but without tackling the real issues of power, race, systemic inequality.
Ah, okay.
The source gives an example. A predominantly white university had this big diversity campaign, but Latinx students felt it was mostly for show. More talk, but no real investment in representing or supporting Latinx culture and identity on campus.
So it felt hollow.
Yeah. This shallow multiculturalism can leave students feeling unseen, having to do all this extra emotional work educating others, fighting stereotypes. So is it fair to say some diversity efforts, even if well-meant, might backfire if they don't address power?
Sounds like just checking a box, not making real change.
Exactly. And then there's the script of exceptionalism.
Exceptionalism.
Yeah, on the surface it sounds positive, right? Acceptance comes from being outstanding, working super hard, earning your spot. But for marginalized students, this can be a real double bind.
How so? Isn't hard work good?
Of course. But say you're a first-generation, low-income student of color. Achieving that exceptional status might mean, maybe without realizing it, aligning more with the dominant culture, possibly creating distance from your own background. Plus, research shows even being exceptional doesn't always shield you from racism or classism. These students often feel this intense pressure to constantly prove they belong, leading to isolation, self-doubt.
And it ignores the real barriers they face.
Completely. The focus on individual exceptionalism glosses over the huge social, legal, economic hurdles many students navigate. It ignores the whole politics of belonging.
So these harmful scripts, assimilation, color evasion, shallow multiculturalism, exceptionalism, they all seem to demand sacrifice. Give up part of yourself to belong. Reinforcing that difference is the problem.
You nailed it. But thankfully, the article then moves on to explore more transformative scripts of acceptance, ones that truly value difference and don't demand that trade-off.
Okay, let's hear about those. What are these better approaches?
So the first big category is culturally relevant approaches. The goal here is to connect learning directly to students' cultural backgrounds and lives.
Makes sense.
This involves using identity-safe cues, signals that tell a student their social identity is accepted and valued. Could be anything from diverse representation in course readings to highlighting the strengths of different groups.
Like seeing yourself reflected.
Exactly. Research shows that seeing successful role models who share your background boosts belonging. Also, emphasizing collaborative learning can resonate more with students from collectivist cultures.
So, making learning feel meaningful and affirming.
Precisely. And going even deeper is culturally relevant pedagogy. This is a well-established teaching approach. It aims to help students maintain their cultural integrity while succeeding academically and developing a critical lens on social inequities.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is. It means educators really learning about their students' communities, fostering cultural pride, encouraging collaboration, and seeing knowledge as something co-created.
That sounds like a much more empowering educational environment.
Definitely. Although the person who developed it, Ladson Billings, later pointed out that sometimes it gets implemented superficially, without that crucial focus on power dynamics. Just becomes about food and festivals again, which led to the development of culturally sustaining approaches.
Okay, relevant versus sustaining. What's the key difference?
The idea is that just being relevant might not be enough to ensure the long-term vitality of marginalized cultures. Culturally sustaining pedagogy aims to actively support students in developing competence in the dominant culture while also nurturing and sustaining their home cultures, not an either.
Got it. And this links back to Yoso's community cultural wealth idea.
Absolutely. That model identifies different forms of cultural capital like navigational, familial, linguistic capital that institutions often overlook. Culturally sustaining approaches try to recognize and build on these diverse strengths.
Okay.
And this brings us back full circle to counterspaces.
Right, we talked about those for sharing stories. How do they fit with cultural sustenance?
Well, counterspaces really embody this sustaining approach. They help students develop skills to navigate the dominant culture, that's leveraging cultural wealth, while simultaneously affirming and sustaining their cultural identities.
So they do both.
Yeah, through key processes. Sharing personal stories, narrative identity work, swapping strategies for navigating challenges, relational transactions, and collectively pushing back against marginalizing systems, acts of resistance. Research shows counterspaces empower students to challenge the university status quo.
So it's not just about feeling okay in that space. It's about building skills and actively challenging inequality.
Exactly. And finally, the article looks at acceptance through plurality and the idea of third spaces.
Third spaces, what are they?
Think of them as environments or approaches designed to transform conflict and difference into fuel for collaboration and learning. They actively challenge the need for sameness and see diversity as a source of innovation. Remember Nepantla, that personal space for transformation. Third spaces are like the social equivalent settings where diverse people can genuinely learn from each other's perspectives.
So embracing difference to find new ways of relating beyond the usual scripts.
You got it. There's a great example of a leadership program for migrant students. It intentionally ditched traditional teaching methods. Instead, it connected students' personal histories to their present lives, supported their cultural practices, and empowered them as learners and change agents. Research found it really shifted relationships and power dynamics.
And that loving playfulness idea comes back here.
Yes. Lugona's concept is vital for creating real third spaces. It's about engaging with openness without trying to make everyone alike. It especially requires those with more power to interact with others with genuine care and curiosity.
Why is that so important?
Because without that loving intent, interactions that seem playful or harmless can actually just reinforce existing inequalities. Play without love can be marginalizing.
It sounds like building these spaces takes real effort, stepping outside comfort zones.
Absolutely. And while true third spaces might be rare in universities, the article suggests intergroup dialogue is more common practice that shares some DNA.
Intergroup dialogue.
Yeah, these structured conversations aim to build critical awareness, bridge differences, and spur social change. They have overlap with culturally sustaining pedagogy and third spaces, But the article hints there's room to bring in even more culturally sustaining elements and that loving playfulness.
It makes you wonder why these more transformative approaches aren't everywhere. The article mentioned resistance.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's increasing pushback against educational work that explicitly tackles power, identity, and oppression. That makes implementing culturally sustaining approaches and creating third spaces harder, but arguably even more crucial.
Wow. Well, this has been a really, really insightful deep dive into the real complexities of belonging at university. So to wrap up, what's the key takeaway for listeners?
I think the absolute core message is this. Belonging is tied to acceptance, yes, but the kind of acceptance matters immensely. There's a world of difference between acceptance that forces you into a mold and acceptance that genuinely values and sustains the diverse identities.
Right. And that politics of belonging framework really helps us see the power dynamics involved, especially for students who've been historically marginalized.
Exactly. It forces us to ask, who gets to define acceptance?
Yes.
And what are the costs for those who don't fit that definition?
So for you, our listener, as you reflect on education spaces or maybe any community you're part of, here's something to think about. What does acceptance truly look like there? Does it implicitly ask people to hide parts of themselves to fit in?
Or does it strive to create a space where everyone can actually become more fully themselves, embracing all those unique qualities and experiences?
It's a powerful question.
And if this chat sparked your interest, we definitely encourage you to explore some of these ideas. Further counterspaces, culturally sustaining pedagogy, that really powerful concept of loving playfulness. They offer really valuable ways to think about building more equitable places where everyone, truly everyone, feels they belong.